There is a moment that almost every survivor describes. Not the loud moments, not the screaming, not the accusations, not the days when everything felt like it was on fire. A quieter moment. A moment where you were sitting across from them, maybe at dinner, maybe in the car, maybe in bed at 2 a.m, and you noticed something small, something that didn't fit. A flicker behind their eyes that looked almost like panic. A pause before they spoke that lasted just a half second too long. A grip on their phone that was tighter than it needed to be, and you noticed it, and then you did what you had been trained to do. You explained it away. You told yourself you were imagining things. You told yourself they were just tired, just having a bad day. Because the alternative, the idea that what you were seeing was real, that what you were sensing was true, felt too large to hold. But here is what nobody told you. What you saw in that moment was not your imagination. It was not anxiety. It was not projection. What you saw was the beginning of a collapse that narcissists spend their entire lives trying to make sure you never witness. And today that is exactly what we are going to talk about. Not the version of the narcissist they perform for the world. Not the confident, controlled, untouchable mask they wear in public. We're going to talk about what is happening underneath. What is always happening underneath. And why understanding it, truly understanding it, not just intellectually but in your body, in your nervous system, changes everything about the way you see what was done to you. Because here is the first thing you need to understand. A narcissist does not abuse you because they are powerful. They abuse you because they are terrified. And that distinction is not a small one. It is not a technicality. It is the entire map of everything that happened inside that relationship. Every time they diminished you, every time they twisted your words, every time they made you feel like you were the problem, the unstable one, the too sensitive one. That was not strength. That was a system in crisis, doing the only thing it knows how to do to survive. And once you see that clearly, something shifts inside you, not into sympathy, not into excusing what they did, but into something far more useful. Clarity, the kind of clarity that stops you from spending years trying to make sense of behavior that was never about you at all. So let us start at the beginning, not the beginning of your relationship with them, the beginning of your relationship with them. The beginning of what they actually are, underneath the performance, underneath the charm and the confidence, and the way they could make a room turn toward them like sunflowers, toward light. Underneath all of that, a narcissist is operating from a wound so deep, so early, so fundamental that most of them are not even aware it exists. Psychologists call it a fragmented self. What that means in plain language is this. At some point very early in life, something happened, often a combination of things, not a single event, that made it feel unbearable to be ordinary, to be flawed, to be human. And so a decision was made, not a conscious decision, not a choice they sat down and made with full awareness, but a deep, structural decision that the psyche makes when it cannot tolerate its own vulnerability. The decision was, I will build something else, something that cannot be hurt, something that cannot be questioned, something that cannot fail, and that something is what you spend months or years living with. A construction, an architecture of superiority, control, and entitlement built specifically to keep the real self, the small, terrified, deeply ashamed self, locked, where no one, including themselves, ever has to look at it. Now here's where it gets important for you specifically, for survivors, because you have probably asked yourself some version of this question 100 times. Why did they treat me the way they did? Why me? Was I not enough? Was I too much? Did I do something to bring this out in them? And I want you to hear this clearly, with all the weight it deserves. The way they treated you had almost nothing to do with you, your value, your worth, your lovability. What it had everything to do with was this. At some point you became a mirror. And not the kind of mirror they wanted, not the kind that reflected back the perfect, admirable, superior image they needed to maintain the construction. You became the kind of mirror that threatened to show them what was actually there. And that perceived threat is what activated the collapse we are going to talk about today. Because a narcissist's hidden collapse is not something that happens once. It is not a breakdown you would have witnessed clearly if you had only looked harder. It is a constant, ongoing process happening beneath the surface of every interaction. A structural instability that they are managing every single moment. of every single day. And the way they manage it, the primary mechanism, the tool they reach for first, last, and always is you, or whoever is in your position, the person closest to them, the person most available to either feed the construction or threaten it. You are not a partner to them in the way you understand partnership. You were a regulator. You were the system they used to keep the collapse from becoming visible. And when you stopped being able to do that, when your own truth, your own needs, your own quiet refusal to keep shrinking became too loud, the hidden collapse started becoming less hidden, and what came out of them then felt like cruelty, felt like punishment, felt sometimes like something almost inhuman. It was not inhuman, it was a system fighting for its survival, and in the sections that follow I am going to show you exactly how that system works. 5 specific mechanisms. 5 things that were happening inside them that you were never supposed to see, and by the time we are finished, you will not just understand what happened to you. You will understand why you are not, and never were, the broken one in that story. Let us start with the first mechanism, and I want you to pay attention here because this one is the one that caused you the most confusion inside the relationship. The one that made you question your memory, your perception, your sanity. The first hidden collapse mechanism of a narcissist is this. They do not have a stable sense of self without external input. And I do not mean that the way a confidence coach means it when they say everyone needs validation sometimes. I mean it in a structural, neurological, moment-to-moment way. I mean that when a narcissist is alone, truly alone, no audience, no mirror, no one to perform, for they experience something that most people will never experience. A kind of internal emptiness so profound it borders on non-existence. Psychologists call it ego fragility. Some researchers describe it as an identity vacuum, what it feels like from the inside, based on everything we understand about narcissistic architecture, is something close to dissolving. Like the edges of the self start to blur, like there is no floor beneath them. This is why they cannot be alone for long. This is why they always need someone in orbit. This is why even when they treated you with contempt, they could not let you go. Not because they loved you the way you understood love, but because you were keeping them solid. Your attention, your reactio, NS, your presence, even your pain, was input, and input, and input kept the construction from collapsing inward. Now here is the scene I want you to imagine, because I know you have lived some version of this. You are in an argument with them, a real one. Not the small daily negotiations, but a real confrontation, where you are saying something true, something you have held inside for months, and you can see that it is landing. You can see for just a moment that they heard you, that something in what you said cracked the surface. And then watch what happens next. Watch the speed of the pivot. Suddenly the conversation is not about what you just said. Suddenly it is about something you did 3 months ago, or the way you said what you said, or the fact that you always do this, you always bring things up at the wrong time. You never consider how they feel. Within 60 seconds, you are no longer the person who just spoke a hard truth. You are the aggressor. You are the problem. And you are the problem. And you are so busy defending yourself that the original truth disappears completely. That pivot was not a manipulation tactic they consciously chose from a menu of options. That pivot was a survival reflex. The moment you cracked the surface, the moment real reflection became possible, the emptiness underneath started to show, and the system cannot allow that. So it redirects every time with the speed and precision of something that has been practiced since childhood. And you walked away from those conversations feeling crazy, feeling guilty, feeling like somehow you had done something wrong, when what actually happened was this. You got close to the truth, and the system ejected you before you could see it. The second hidden collapse mechanism is related, but it operates differently, and it is the one that survivors often find the hardest to talk about, because it involves something that felt, at the time, like love. The second mechanism is called idealization, and its hidden function, the function nobody explains, is not about you at all. When a narcissist idealized you at the beginning, when they told you that you were different, that they had never met anyone like you, that you understood them in a way no one else ever had, that was not a lie in the way a calculated lie is a lie. It was something stranger and sadder and more important for you to understand. It was a projection. They were not seeing you, they were seeing what they needed you to be. A perfect mirror, a source of reflection so clean and so consistent that it could keep the construction stable indefinitely. This is why the idealization phase felt so overwhelming, so consuming, so unlike anything you had experienced before, because it was not the normal rhythm of two people slowly discovering each other. It was an intensity specifically calibrated, again, not consciously, but structurally, to pull you as close as possible, as fast as possible, because the system needed a reliable source of what researchers call narcissistic supply. And you, with your empathy, your attentiveness, your genuine desire to be there for someone, you were, from the construction's perspective, an extraordinary find. But here is the part that breaks something open when survivors finally hear it. The devaluation, the coldness, the contempt, the sudden cruelty that came after the idealization was not because you changed. It was not because you failed. It was because you were human. Because no human being can be a perfect mirror indefinitely. Because at some point you had a bad day, or an opinion they disagreed with, or a need that was inconvenient, or a boundary that interrupted the supply. And the moment you showed them your humanness, your beautiful, necessary, completely ordinary humanness, the projection shattered. And what replaced it was not disappointment. It was something that functioned like rage, because in their internal experience, you had not simply been imperfect. You had withdrawn something they needed to survive. And the punishment that followed was the system's response to perceived abandonment, even when you had not gone anywhere. You did not fail the relationship. The relationship was designed from its architecture to fail you, because it was never built on two people. It was built on one person and a mirror, and mirrors eventually always show the truth. And the truth is what a narcissist spends every waking moment of their life trying not to see. There is a specific moment in almost every survivor's story where something changed. Not dramatically, not with a confession or an apology or a sudden, clear admission of what had been happening. It was subtler than that. Something in the dynamic shifted. The control became more desperate. The reactions became less measured. The mask, which had always fit so perfectly, started showing edges, gaps, moments where what was underneath leaked through in ways that were impossible to explain away. And most survivors, when they describe this period, say the same thing. They say it felt more dangerous. They say it felt like walking on glass that was already cracked. They say they did not know what they were seeing, but they knew in their body that something was different. What they were seeing was narcissistic injury in its advanced stage, and understanding what that means, truly understanding it, not as a clinical term, but as a lived reality, is one of the most important things a survivor can do, because it reframes everything about that terrifying final chapter of the relationship. It takes what felt like your fault and shows you clearly, precisely, exactly what it actually was. Narcissistic injury is not simply the narcissist being upset. It is not a bad mood or a rough week or stress from work. Narcissistic injury is what happens when the construction, that elaborate architecture of superiority and control they build to keep the empty self hidden, takes a hit it cannot absorb quietly. When something or someone delivers a truth that the system cannot redirect fast enough. And the response to that injury is never proportionate. It is never logical. It is never about what actually happened on the surface. Because the injury is not happening on the surface. It is happening at the foundation. And when a foundation cracks, the entire structure responds. Now, here is what you need to understand about the timing of this. Narcissistic injury does not only happen during big confrontations. It does not only happen when you challenge them directly or threaten to leave or expose them to someone else. It can happen in the smallest moments. A comment at dinner that accidentally implied that they were wrong about something. A day when your own life was going well and the attention in the room was on you and not on them. A moment where you were so clearly, visibly yourself, confident, grounded, at ease, that the mirror you were supposed to be started reflecting something they could not control. These micro-injuries accumulate, and over time an accumulation of micro-injuries does the same thing a single large one does. It destabilizes the construction, and the destabilized construction becomes dangerous. Here are the 3 signs that the hidden collapse was already in motion. 3 things you may have witnessed and not had language for. 3 things that now you can finally name. The first sign is the escalation of surveillance. When a narcissist's internal structure begins to destabilize, their need for control over their external environment intensifies in direct purport. Ion. What this looks like in practice is a sudden increase in monitoring, wanting to know where you are, who you spoke to, what you said, what you meant by it. Going through your phone, not once, but repeatedly, asking the same questions in slightly different ways, testing for inconsistencies, searching for evidence of the betrayal they are certain is coming because their internal system tells them that exposure is near. And what made this so disorienting for you is that from the outside, it looked like jealousy. It looked like insecurity. It looked like insecurity. It looked sometimes almost like they cared so much that it was tipping into obsession. But it was not about you. It was about the system trying to secure its perimeter, trying to control the information environment around it so that nothing could get in that might accelerate the collapse it was already feeling from the inside. The second sign is the sudden devaluation of things that previously held value. Do you remember a period where, almost without warning, things that used to matter to them stopped mattering? Hobbies they had been passionate about, friends they had praised, achievements that had once been central to their identity, and perhaps most painfully, you. The version of you they had idealized. Suddenly the qualities they had once celebrated became flaws. The things they had loved about you became irritants. The dynamic inverted in a way that felt whiplash-inducing because nothing about you had changed. What changed was this: the construction was in the process of discarding sources of supply that were no longer performing their function, and was searching desperately for new ones that might. The devaluation was not a verdict on your worth. It was inventory management inside a system that was running out of ways to stay stable. The third sign is the most important one, and it is the one most survivors overlook because it is disguised as something else. The third sign is the performance of invulnerability becoming visibly effortful. There is a difference between someone who is genuinely confident and someone who is working hard to appear confident. And at some point, if you look back now with the clarity you have today, you will find moments where you could see the effort, where the smile took a half second too long to arrive, where the dismissiveness had a slight edge of panic underneath it, where they told you they did not care about something with just a little too much emphasis to be believable. Those moments were not mistakes. They were cracks. The performance was running on increasingly depleted resources, and what you were seeing was not a person who was fine. You were seeing a structure that was exhausted from holding itself together, a construction that was piece by piece beginning to come apart at the places it had always been most fragile. And here is what I want you to sit with for a moment, because this is where the empowerment begins, not the false empowerment of revenge or anger or winning. Something quieter and more durable than that. You did not cause the collapse. You did not trigger the injury by being too sensitive or too demanding or too present. The collapse was always coming. The injury was always structural. The construction was always, from the very beginning, one honest moment away from fracturing. And the fact that it happened in your presence, on your watch, during your relationship, that does not make you responsible. It makes you a witness who survived something that was not designed to be survived with your sense of self intact. And yet here you are, intact, asking the questions, seeking the understanding, doing the thing the narcissist could never do, which is looking directly at a hard truth and choosing to stay present with it rather than build a wall against it. That is not weakness. That is the exact opposite of everything they were. And in the next section, we are going to talk about what comes after the collapse becomes fully visible, what it looks like when the mask comes entirely off, and more importantly, what it means for you and for the life you are building now. There is something that happens when the mask comes completely off, not the partial removals you witnessed during the relationship, the moments of cruelty that were followed by enough charm to make you doubt what you saw. Not the control reveals, the calculated vulnerabilities they showed you early on to make you feel trusted and chosen. The complete removal, the moment when the construction stops being able to maintain itself at all and what is underneath becomes fully, undeniably visible. Survivors who have reached this point in their journey, who have enough distance and enough clarity to look back at that moment without flinching, almost universally describe the same experience. They say it was not what they expected. They say that what they found underneath the mask was not a monster. It was not even someone they recognized as powerful. What they found was something small, something hollow, something that looks stripped of all its architecture, almost unbearably fragile. And many of them say the same thing about how that made them feel. They say it did not bring them the satisfaction they thought it would. They say it brought them something they were not prepared for, something that took time to name, something that, when they finally named it, turned out to be grief. And I want to talk about that grief for a moment because it is one of the most misunderstood parts of the survivor experience. People around you, well-meaning people, people who love you, will sometimes struggle to understand why you grieve someone, who hurt you. They will say things like, you are better off, or you should be relieved, or why do you still think about them at all? And if you have ever felt ashamed of the grief, if you have ever tried to hide it, or rush through it, or convince yourself it means you still love them or that you were somehow complicit in what happened, I want you to hear this clearly. The grief is not for them. Not really. The grief is for the person you were inside that relationship. The version of you that tried so hard, that believed so completely, that gave so generously to something that was structurally incapable of receiving what you were offering. The grief is for the relationship you thought you had, which was real to you even if it was a projection to them. The grief is for the years, the energy, the softness, the trust, and that grief is not a weakness. It is not a sign that you are stuck. It is the most honest thing you can do with what happened to you. It is your nervous system finally telling the truth about the size of what it survived. But grief, when it is witnessed and honored rather than avoided, does something remarkable. It moves, it does not stay. It passes through and leaves behind something that no amount of anger or analysis or revenge fantasy ever could. It leaves behind clarity, a specific kind of clarity that is not about them at all, a clarity that is entirely finally about you. And this is the part of the narcissist's hidden collapse that you were never supposed to know, not the mechanisms, not the injury, not the signs of destabilization. The fact that their collapse, the thing they spend their entire lives engineering your reality to prevent you from seeing, was the very thing that made your liberation possible, because you cannot fully leave something you do not understand. You can physically exit. You can block numbers and change addresses and build new routines. But some part of you stays tethered to a story that does not make sense. Some part of you keeps returning to the question, why? Why did they do it? Why was it never enough? Why did the person who said you were everything treat you like you were nothing? And without understanding the hidden collapse, that question has no satisfying answer. It just circles. It keeps you up at night. It makes you doubt your judgment and your instincts and your ability to trust yourself or anyone else again. But now you have the answer. Not the answer that makes it hurt less immediately. The answer that makes it make sense permanently. They did what they did because they were operating from a wound that predated you by decades. Because the construction they built to survive, that wound required a constant supply of external validation that no single human being could ever sustainably provide. Because when you inevitably, naturally, humanly failed to be a perfect mirror, the system experienced it as an existential threat and responded accordingly. Because the collapse was always happening. Because the mask was always a mask. Because the person who made you feel like the most important person in the world and then made you feel like you were losing your mind was not two different people. There was one fractured system, cycling between the version that needed you desperately and the version that resented you for being needed. And you with your empathy, your patience, your deep and genuine capacity for love, you were not foolish to believe in them. You were not naive. You were not weak. You were exactly who you are. Someone who saw a person in pain and tried to help. Someone who was handed a story and trusted it, because trusting is not a character flaw. It is a sign of a nervous system that was never organized around deception the way theirs was, and that is not some even to be ashamed of. That is something to protect. So here is what I want to leave you with. Not a list of red flags, though those matter. Not a warning to never trust again, because that would be letting their collapse finish a job it never managed to complete. What I want to leave you with is this. The narcissist's greatest fear, the thing the entire construction was built to prevent, is being truly seen, being known without the mask, being exposed as ordinary, as flawed as human. And the profound, quietly radical truth of your survival is this. You already are all of those things. Ordinary in the most extraordinary sense of the word. Flawed in the ways that make real intimacy possible. Human in a way they could never allow themselves to be. And those qualities, the very things they tried to use against you, the sensitivity, the openness, the willingness to feel, are not the reasons you got hurt. They are the reasons you are still here, still feeling, still seeking understanding, still capable of connection that is real rather than performed. The narcissist's hidden collapse was always going to happen, with or without you, to whoever stood closest. But you did not just survive it. You are doing something far more courageous than surviving. You are understanding it. And understanding it means it cannot happen to you the same way again. Not because you have closed yourself off, but because you can now see the architecture from the outside. You know what a construction looks like. You know what performed confidence feels like against your skin compared to real warmth. You know the difference between someone who is choosing you and someone who is using you to choose themselves. And that knowledge, hard-won, expensive, paid for in ways no one should have to pay, is yours now, permanently. No one can collapse that.